Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are taking a look back at week 4 of the 2023 season of the Overwatch League. Real quick, I'll throw my picks up from this past week. You can see here 9-0 on the picks this week. Pretty good. This of course only includes the Western region games because the Eastern region we have a bracket. I'll talk a bit more about the bracket here in a little bit, but let's start by talking a bit about what happened in the Western region this past week. First thing I want to talk about here is the Boston Uprising getting their revenge against the Toronto Defiant. After the Pro-Am defeat that the Uprising had, kind of shocking loss in that matchup. Uprising bouncing back this week with a 3-1 win over the Defiant. A lot of people, I think, are doubting in a lot of ways this Uprising team, and I think that at this point in time it seems like it's not really something that I buy into at this point in time, right? The Uprising have won 5 out of the 6 games they played. Their one loss was to a Titans team that we rate pretty highly, all things considered. It was the week that Izayaki, had the collapsed lung, so I don't really think that there's a lot to kind of look at there and say the Uprising are washed or bad or anything like that. Yes, they've lost some games. When you include their Pro-Am loss and you include that loss to the Titans. But outside of that, I think this Uprising team has looked really good. I think that they have certain metas they look pretty good. Certain maps I don't think they look great on. But I thought the win over the Defiant was a huge win. They also beat the Eternal. That series was a little bit closer than maybe you would have wanted it to be. Same with the series against the Gladiators, but the Eternal are a weird team this one time. But the Uprising won the games you wanted to see them win. They were able to actually look pretty solid against the Defiant, even on an off-tank map when Kalios came in, which was my biggest concern for this team, was kind of how can they look on those maps where you have to put Kalios in. But they looked very good when he came in. So I think that what we're seeing really is the Uprising are figuring out what they are. We talked about how the big benefit that the Defiant have had on a lot of other teams, that these players know each other well. They've played with each other in the past, so they kind of have that pre-existing synergy. And the Uprising have to kind of find some of that synergy now, and they talked about that. I believe it was Smurf talked about that in a post-game interview, that the thing that the team has to do is just kind of figure out how to play alongside each other really, really well. But we're seeing that this team is one of those really good teams. Right now, I think that the Uprising are in a very good position to potentially get into the Mid-Season Madness. I think that they have the talent for sure, but also I think as they start to look better and better and better, they're just going to keep being one of those teams that is very, very dangerous and very scary for everybody. So, very big shout out to what we've seen from the Uprising so far. Yeah, I definitely think there's some concern about the Defiant based on what we've seen out of them. They haven't looked great in a lot of their kind of games. They have had a pretty tough schedule. Their 2 wins are against the Valiant and the Excelsior. Their losses are to the Uprising and the Shock and the Gladiators and the Mayhem, right? So they're a team that I think second half of the season bounce back, hopefully kind of a thing that you see from them in terms of that kind of easier half of the season potentially, right? Where they get to play more teams kind of around them in the standings, right? I don't know who they play next week. They play the Vegas Eternal. That's a game they should win. They play the Spitfire. That's a game you'd think they should win. So then, they haven't played the Titans yet. They haven't played the Justice yet. So they have some room there. They also haven't played the Outlaws of the Rain. So, it is what it is. But I really wanted to kind of use this time, mainly talking about the Uprising, because I think the Uprising right now do look very good. I'm very happy with seeing out of them. And I'm excited to see them go forward, because I do think this team really does have the potential to win a lot of games this season. I think they are one of the teams. I would still put them in the bubble to win the Mid-Season Madness and win the Grand Finals right now. I think they're probably a little bit more likely to win late in the season than they are early in the season, but this is a really good team. I think that they have kind of silenced their doubters, and I think that we're looking at a very good future here as we go forward for the remainder of 2023 with the Boston Uprising. Another team that's honestly impressing quite a bit, and a team that we have seemingly kind of bought into as a community over the past couple of weeks, is the Los Angeles Gladiators. And finally, they got a week where they didn't have to go up against a team like Atlanta or Houston in it. which has kind of been the thing that has hurt them as a team. But this was a week where, in theory, their schedule was very winnable, and they took it and ran with it. 3-0 win over the Vegas Eternal, 3-1 win over the Vancouver Titans. That was a big pick game for me, as was actually the Defiant versus Uprising game. I didn't mention that. But Gladiators victorious, right? Kevster birthday buff. So really good stuff for the Gladiators. I'm very much buying into them. They are another team, similarly to Boston, that I think the Gladiators are a team that in theory will get better as the year goes on. And they've gotten better quicker than I expected them to. They have reached a level of like pretty good, and all in all, like one of the better teams in the league right now. That like a lot of people have them kind of power rankings 3-4 kind of range in the West. And I think that's super valid based on what we've seen out of them. They've beaten every team that isn't named the Atlanta Reign or Houston Outlaws, including the Florida Mayhem, who we also feel very highly about. A Titans team that, beat the Uprising 3-0 a couple of weeks ago. A Defiant team that, generally speaking, people kind of feel okay about or have felt okay about. They're not really performing maybe where we thought they would. But essentially, the Gladiators are winning the games you want to see them win, and they're looking pretty competitive against some of the teams maybe that they don't look as good against. And to be fair, the Gladiators did beat both the Reign and the Outlaws in the Pro-Am. So we know they can beat those teams. It's not impossible, right? So I think the Gladiators are one of the teams that I'm really intrigued by going forward, because I think they are going to be one of the teams to watch most firmly as we get into the kind of later part. Next week is obviously the final week of the qualifiers. Then we move into the actual kind of tournament itself. We get into the knockout stage. Because to me, the Gladiators, right, they're competing with Florida and Boston the most in order to be that kind of 4th/3rd team from the Western region to go to Korea. And I think the Gladiators right now seem to be the team that should be in that position in a comfortable way. But it's definitely not something that I think is 100% locked up. I think there is reason to think that this team has some, potential to kind of drop a series to a team like the Uprising or the Mayhem, right? Even though I do think the Gladiators generally look good. So they're an interesting team. I do think right now you have to feel confident in them. I don't think they're the most deep team in the league, but they know their strength so well. They play to their strength so well that I think they'll be fine. But I think they're a very interesting team. And I think that the more they win, they do the thing they need to do, right? And if they get the luck of getting to go into the spring stage knockouts and Atlanta and Houston aren't there, guess what? Gladiators, at that point in time, who is there in that group that you think firmly, definitively 100% is a better team or should feel, as a player, you think absolutely this is a game that the Gladiators can't win? I don't think there is one, right? So I think of those Western Region teams, outside of that top two, I do genuinely think the Gladiators have a very good argument to be the third best team in the region. I don't think we expected it. I certainly think that there are areas that I could see them kind of struggling more than some of the other teams, but everything we see out of them right now is just continually proving us wrong and continue to impress us as fans, and I think that is really what they are as a team. I think they're really good, and so I don't really have a lot of concern right now based on what I have seen. Up next, I want to talk a bit about the San Francisco Shock and the LA Valiant. LA Valiant, I'll start with them first a bit, despite the fact that I do think they have looked better throughout a lot of this season, and they've been improving. They unfortunately will finish this stage with an 0-8 record. The Valiant kind of got the short end of the stick because they're the only team in the Western region, as far as my kind of understanding is, they're the only team in the Western region whose bye week, if you will, is the last week of the stage. So they have not had a week off to kind of prepare and in theory get better. They have had to play every single week since the first week of the season. That's not the case with any other team in the West, right? The Uprising were off 2 weeks ago, or the Uprising were off last week, actually. Like New York is off this week, Atlanta's off this week, the Gladiators were off last week. So the Valiant kind of got screwed in that way, that they haven't had the time to get to kind of sit back. But it does, in theory, work to their benefit a bit because they get essentially a week off before everybody else does. They know that they don't have to do anything next week, and they won't be playing in the knockouts. So they get a little bit more time now to kind of get into a better position. So we're not going to see the Valiant for a while, so I did want to talk about them just a little bit here before we get to the last few teams moving forward. I think Seeker is so good, and I really want to see what this team is able to do. I get a lot of kind of similar energy to what we saw from the Titans last year, where Aspire was playing so well, and that there was clear like moments where this team was improving, they were getting better, and they just couldn't get over that hurdle. There was that game last year between the Titans and the Justice, where the Titans pushed the Justice to map 5, and the Justice took it. Very similar vibes to the Valiant series that they had with the Mayhem, where they were so close, they just couldn't get it over the edge. But everything I have seen from the Valiant right now tells me they're really, really good. They just need to kind of clean up some of their play. And I think if they can enable Seeker to win, that's where this team really is going to have their best chance to win. But they got unlucky having to play this Shock here to kind of close out the week. And I still don't feel great about the Shock. It's hard to gauge the Shock in a lot of ways because, to be fair to the Shock, we criticize the Shock quite a bit, and we criticize them for who they could be as a team. But outside of that loss to the Justice, this team really has lost the games that you think they should lose and won the games you think they should win, right? They lost to the Reign, they lost to the Outlaws. Well, guess what? Everybody has lost to the Reign, and everybody but the Reign has lost to the Outlaws. And the Shock beat New York. The Shock beat the Valiant. They beat the Defiant. Yes, they lost to the Justice. Yes, that was a bad loss. But if you look at the standings right now, the Shock are below the Justice, and they're below the Reign, they're below the Outlaws, right? So I'm getting almost like 2020 Atlanta vibes with this team, where they feel kind of gatekeepery, which is interesting. So I want to see them play a team like Vancouver. I want to see them play the Gladiators. I want to see them play the Uprising, because where are those teams in that kind of standing is going to be interesting. We'll see them play the Uprising next week. They play the Mayhem next week. Those are 2 good games for the Shock, but it is not out of the realm of possibility that the Shock finish this stage 3 and 5. Right now, I would say it's pretty likely that's the record they finish with. But when they can get things going, they do look pretty good. But it's really been kind of proper, doing proper things. The game against the Valiant was a proper diff. I mean, he just carried them to win there, or carried them to the win there. Now, I do want to kind of touch on this little bit of information, this little statistic that has been floating around on Twitter a bit. Reinforced tweeted about it, and then I've seen it in some other places as well. But the San Francisco Shock with Max in a tank. Max has won a single map and has lost, I believe, 8 maps. Whereas when they have Junbin in, they were batting 500. I believe now they are looking at 9 and 6 when Junbin plays. I think, to me, what I see from this is you just have to commit to a single tank. I've been saying this for a little bit now. To me, you have the statistical data and the statistical information to support the idea that you realistically should be playing Junbin more than you should be playing Max. Max is 1 and 8 in maps. Junbin is 9 and 6 in maps. The only thing for me, honestly, where I think Max coming in makes the most sense is bringing Max in on maps where you need to play something like Zarya or Junker Queen or Sigma, or Diva, whatever, those off-tank heroes. If you genuinely think that Max on that hero on that map is so much better than Junbin that the change in communication is more justified. But I think that they should just, generally speaking, roll with Junbin more than Max. I think that's what the statistics show right now. I think with the way the meta is right now, if you want to be able to play Winston or Ramatra or whatever, I think Junbin gives you the better opportunity. We've even seen Junbin play Diva at a pretty high level as well. I think Max is a player who is very good. I think there is a role for him on this team. But I think they need to focus on one tank, and I think right now the evidence suggests that Junbin is that tank, and that's what I want to see them roll with. It could be the thing that helps them. I still think their support line is struggling this year, which I think is part of the reason why this team has struggled as much as they have. They did not look good when they played Houston, and they really did not look all that strong for quite a bit of that series against the Valiant. Like I said, Proper really did kind of have a gargantuan play. But I think if you can solidify having one tank, and you don't have to keep changing your structure, your shot calling structure, that would help the team. So I think that's really what I want to see from the Shock. I think we are seeing the improvement when we see them play. I am noticing changes that make me feel more confident. I think next week, when they play the Mayhem, when they play the Uprising, it is going to be crucial that they make the right plays, they put the right heroes in, or the right players in the right heroes, and I think that is what I'm looking for the most next week. Any of the teams, because I think they just need to get it right going forward. Because if they cannot get it right, this Shock team that we all think is potentially a championship caliber team might not have what it takes to do it. Let's move on quickly to the APAC region. I mentioned before my bracket. Overall, pretty solid look at it. With based, kind of what I did. The big game that, of course, most people got wrong, at least I assume most people got wrong, was the Shanghai Dragons versus Sin Priestley Gaming, of course. SPG, arguably the weakest contenders team in the tournament. Them or Rhodes. Definitely the weakest of the Korean teams. And the Shanghai Dragons, who are, even though they are the weakest team in the Western region, or the Eastern region right now, still an Overwatch League team with Overwatch League coaches and Overwatch League infrastructure, all that type of stuff. And they were unable to get past SPG. And it's really just the thing of, you look at Shanghai, you can see it. It's so obvious. They cannot play. They don't have flexibility. Fleta's Winston isn't really all that good, and it's his best hero. He cannot play anything other than Winston, really. Well and truly, he struggles on pretty much everything else, which is kind of surprising. But they just don't look great in other compositions. Gundam Jin Lucio still isn't very good. Avril's been saying it for a bit now, that when he plays Brig, they actually look pretty good. And it's true, they do. I was saying that last season too. He's not a Lucio player. Gangnam Jin should never be on Lucio. He should never touch that hero. He just does not have the Lucio gene within him. And it's a struggle to watch this team play because they just don't have what they need. So it is all in all a kind of interesting team to watch. They're very kind of bizarre in the way they play. You would think they would be a better team when you consider the fact that they have some good players, and they have like Viper and Hisu have looked really good this year, but they just were not able to beat one of the weaker, lower level teams coming out of contenders, and that's a bad sign because they have to play O2 Blast next week. O2 Blast is the best Korean contender team, and we'll talk about them here in a second. Shanghai's not going to win that game unless they make a miracle improvement going into next week, and I just don't see it happening. So, very unfortunate in my opinion from what we've seen from this Dragon squad. Huge shout out to SPG. They did fall to the Dallas Fuel in their second match, but the fact that they even beat the Dragons is an impressive enough feat as it is, and I just think that they need to be, I think that is important to kind of highlight. And so I want to see what the Dragons do next week. I'm curious to see SPG's game. I think they are playing Panthera next week, which will be cool. I think Panthera should be the favorite in that game, but SPG beat an Owl team, so we'll see. But really disappointing from the Shanghai Dragons this weekend. I think you need to see a lot of improvement from them. And I feel so bad of Viper and Hisu because I just feel like they're the only two right now that really show up every single game. Iris has looked pretty good as well. But I just think that Gangnam Jin and Fleta are honestly kind of holding this team back. And it feels bad when you have a player like Marvel in there who's honestly looking really good and isn't on the team. But speaking of Marvel, he is on that O2 Blast roster, and they had a really great series against the Seoul Infernal. It was a 3-2 series. I managed to catch the end of it live, the last map and a half. One of the best push maps I've ever seen. Genuinely, that Esperanza map was incredible. Awesome comeback from O2 Blast. If you haven't watched that series, that's the game of the weekend I'd recommend you go watch. It was the best game of the weekend in my opinion. Phenomenal game. Absolutely phenomenal. Seoul Infernal, a really good team. And the fact that they were pushed to the brink as much as they were, it was a 2-0 for the Seoul Infernal. The O2 Blast begin kind of crawling their way back, kind of kicking and screaming. And I think you can see that the Seoul Infernal were the better team. I thought the O2 Blast, there were times, there were some rounds. I think it was the first round on the final map, which I want to say was Antarctic Peninsula, but it may have been Oasis. I'm not 100% positive. I think it was Probe who just had 0 Elans, 0 final blows, like 6 deaths. Like you can't have that if you want to find success. Your damage dealer has to be doing damage. Your damage dealer has to be finding something. Your damager has to be finding value. And they weren't getting that in some of those maps. Like I said, I didn't watch the whole series, so I certainly have some things that I missed. But I do think that O2 Blast look very, very good. And I think it is not out of this world to think that O2 Blast could actually be the team that gets out of this group. They would have to get through the Infernal again to do that, most likely. But I think right now, based on what we see from the Infernal in this series with O2 Blast, like, it very much could be an O2 Blast Infernal final here in Bracket B to see who kind of moves on. I don't want to write off the Dallas Fuel yet. I still think they're a very good team, and I think the Dallas Fuel absolutely have what it takes to find success against a team like O2 Blast, and could beat them. You just kind of consider what they've done. But I really just wanted to shout out this game because to me it was the best game of the week, and I think if you haven't watched it, you really should, because it was a phenomenal match. Really good play from both of these teams, but it was ultimately the Overwatch team that did walk away with the win, and I think that kind of result is good for them. I think kind of having that kind of trial by fire, when they've been having a somewhat kind of they've been improving quite a bit. Obviously, last week they played Guangzhou and Hangzhou and were victorious in those matches. Now we have to see them kind of overcome another really good team in O2 Blast. This is really the only real challenge on their schedule this tournament. So if they can get another win over over O2 Blast or manage to beat Dallas twice, whatever it is, they should be in a really good spot, even heading into the Mid-Season Madness, which is good for them. Real quick, throughout the standings, you can see them here. Atlanta still on top. Houston Outlaws finally make their way back into that number 2 spot after having to make up some of the games that they hadn't played yet to match the Mayhem, and the Uprising, of course, also getting up there as well. Atlanta, I think if they win one more game next week, they will guarantee themselves the spot in Korea, and they open up next week against the Vegas Eternal. So pretty easy first game there for the Reign. By Friday, they should already have locked up a spot in Korea. They then will close out against Boston. Boston will have to play them, and they'll have to play the Shock. So tough weekend for the Boston Uprising. Outlaws do have to play the Mayhem and the Titans. So it will be interesting to see kind of what happens. I think right now, Atlanta's they're feeling good. They're feeling great. They're almost guaranteed to lock up that final spot, especially considering Outlaws and Mayhem have to play. So one of those teams has to lose this week. And they play the Uprising, so it's very possible we even see the Outlaws, by beating the Mayhem, guarantee themselves that spot as well. So it'll be an interesting week next week, but then you can see there at the bottom the LA Valiant. 0-8, they finish the stage with no wins, but the Eternal, if they also go winless, will likely fall below the Valiant. So just keep your eyes on that. And no change in the East, because the games they had this week did not count towards their standings. So that is all for today. Let me know your thoughts on this week in the comments down below. Your favorite game from the week, whatever. If you agree with me, was it O2 Blast versus Infernal? Was a different game? Favorite moment from the week, whatever it may be, let me know in the comments down below. But that is all for me for today. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But I'm going to get out of here. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.